Imagine a city where wickedness has reached its peak, the streets are steeped in corruption, and sin has become so immense that it has drawn the attention of God himself. Men seek to have relations with angels, and perversion is the norm. Amidst this chaos, one man struggles to remain faithful, yet his choices lead him to a tragic fate. His story serves as a reminder of how our decisions can shape our future forever. Why did his daughters make such an unthinkable choice? How did it all end? Stay with us until the end to uncover the hidden truth in this shocking story. Lot's first steps. Lot was not always close to evil. In fact, his story began as an opportunity for growth and blessing. He was Abraham's nephew and accompanied him on his journey from Ur of the Chaldeans to Canaan. When famine struck the land, Lot followed Abraham to Egypt, but after a conflict with Pharaoh, they returned to Canaan. Over time, both men prospered so greatly that the land could no longer support their herds. Abundance brought disputes among their shepherds. At that moment, Abraham, with his unwavering faith, chose to avoid conflict. With humility, he gave Lot the first choice. If you go to the left, I will go to the right. If you go to the right, I will go to the left. Genesis 13:9. Lot, captivated by what he saw, chose the fertile plains of the Jordan and settled near Sodom, a prosperous but depraved city. His decision seemed wise from a human perspective, but it was based on material gain rather than spiritual values. Unknowingly, Lot was taking the first step toward a tragedy that would mark his life forever. Lot in Sodom, the city of corruption. At first, Lot merely camped near Sodom, but over time, he became more involved in the city and integrated into its society. Sodom was a place of excess, injustice, and corruption. Its inhabitants had strayed so far from righteousness that their sin cried out against them before God. Genesis 18:20. Despite the wickedness surrounding him, Lot attained a position of prestige in the city. He sat at the gate of Sodom, signifying that he held a degree of authority and recognition among its inhabitants. Genesis 19:1. However, his life there was far from easy. Peter describes him as a man tormented by the depraved behavior of the Sodomites. For that righteous man, living among them day after day, was tormented in his righteous soul by seeing and hearing their lawless deeds. 2 Peter 2:8. Despite his distress, Lot did not leave Sodom. He was caught between two worlds, his desire for a comfortable life and the conscience that tormented him. Without realizing it, Lot had become a man torn between two worlds, unable to let go of what bound him to the city. But his stay in Sodom would soon lead to devastating consequences. The visit of the angels and the wickedness of Sodom. One evening, while Lot was sitting at the city gate, he saw two men approaching. These were no ordinary travelers. They were angels sent by God. As soon as he saw them, he quickly stood up and invited them into his home, insisting that they stay the night under his roof rather than on the street. Genesis 19:1-3. The angels accepted his hospitality, but peace did not last long. Soon the men of Sodom surrounded the house and began shouting, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we may know them." Genesis 19:5. Their demand was not one of mere greeting, but of committing an act of perversion. The city had reached an uncontrollable level of wickedness. Desperate to protect his guests, Lot made an unthinkable decision. "I have two daughters who have never known a man. Let me bring them out to you, and do with them as you please." Genesis 19:8. This act reflects how deeply corrupted his judgment had become. Lot, who had once been blessed by walking with Abraham, was now offering his own daughters to protect strangers. Before the situation could escalate further, the angels intervened. They struck the men of Sodom with blindness, preventing them from finding the door. Genesis 19:11. Then they warned Lot. He had to flee immediately with his family, for God was about to destroy the city. Lot was at a crossroads. Would he escape and leave everything behind, or would he cling to his life in Sodom? Abraham's intercession and the destruction of Sodom. Before Sodom was destroyed, Abraham pleaded with God from afar. Humbly, he dared to intercede for the righteous who might be living there. Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Genesis 18:23-24. In his mercy, God agreed not to destroy the city if 50 righteous people could be found. Abraham continued to negotiate, lowering the number to 10. God consented, but even 10 righteous individuals could not be found in Sodom. Meanwhile, the angels urged Lot, "Get up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or you will be swept away in the punishment of the city." Genesis 19:15. Yet Lot, still attached to his life in Sodom, hesitated. The angels had to physically take him by the hand and lead him and his family out of the city. As they fled, they warned him, "Do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley." Genesis 19:17. But his wife disobeyed. She turned back and was instantly transformed into a pillar of salt. Genesis 19:26. Sodom was destroyed with fire and brimstone. Lot had escaped with his life, but his story was far from over. Lot and his daughters in the cave lot had lost everything: his home, his wife, and his social standing. Though God had rescued him, his life would never be the same again. Fearing for his safety, he chose not to stay in Zoar, the small city where he had sought refuge, and instead fled to the mountains with his 2 daughters. Genesis 19:30. The man who had once chosen the most fertile and prosperous lands now lived in a cave with nothing but the company of his daughters. His story served as a warning about the consequences of choosing based on appearances rather than God's will. In their isolation, Lot's daughters began to fear for their future. To them, humanity had been destroyed, and there were no men left with whom they could start a family. Convinced that they had to take drastic measures to preserve their lineage, they devised a plan. They would intoxicate their father and lie with him without his awareness. Genesis 19:31-32. The elder daughter carried out the act on the first night, and the younger repeated it the following evening. Genesis 19:33-35. Lot, weakened by trauma and alcohol, was unaware of what had transpired. From these unions were born Moab and Ben-Ami, who would become the ancestors of the Moabites and Ammonites, 2 nations that would later become enemies of Israel. Genesis 19:37-38. Lot, who had once been rescued by God, ended his life in obscurity and shame, a shadow of what he could have been. Dying, the birth of Moab and Ammon, consequences of sin. The choices made by Lot's daughters did not just affect their own lives, they had consequences that impacted entire generations. The sons born from this incestuous act became the founders of 2 nations that would be adversaries of Israel. Moab, the ancestor of the Moabites. Ben-Ami, the ancestor of the Ammonites. Genesis 19:37-38. Both nations grew and settled near Israel, but instead of becoming allies, they became Israel's constant enemies. In Deuteronomy 23:3-6, God forbids Moabites and Ammonites from entering the assembly of the Lord due to their opposition to Israel. Lot's sin and the choices of his daughters were not forgotten. Wrong decisions, even when they seem personal, can impact far more people than we realize. However, the story of Moab also brings a glimmer of hope. Despite the sinful origins of this nation, God, in his mercy, allowed the Moabites to produce Ruth, who later became the great-grandmother of King David and ultimately part of the lineage of Jesus. Ruth 4:13-22. Lot was saved, but he never rebuilt his life. His story serves as a warning about how our choices can shape our future and the future of those around us. Lessons from Lot's story. Lot's story is not just an ancient tale, but a timeless warning about the consequences of our decisions. Though he started with a great opportunity alongside Abraham, he ended up in isolation, marked by tragedy and shame. Lot represents those who believe in God, but allow the world to shape their values. He chose what seemed best for his material well-being, yet he ultimately lost what was most important. The Apostle Paul warns, Do not conform to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may discern what is the will of God, what is good, acceptable, and perfect. Romans 12:2. The lesson is clear. Choices based on material gain and immediate gratification can lead to ruin, whereas obedience to God leads to true blessing. Lot was rescued, but his story teaches us that being saved is not enough. We must live according to God's will. Today, a sad Lot story leaves us with a powerful message. The decisions we make today can irreversibly affect our future. Lot had the opportunity to learn from Abraham, a man of faith, but instead of following his example, he chose according to his own judgment and desires. His life serves as a reminder that choices based on materialism and convenience can lead to destruction. Jesus himself referenced the destruction of Sodom as a warning for the end times. Likewise, just as it was in the days of Lot, they were eating, drinking, buying, selling, planting and building. But on the day when Lot went out from Sodom, fire and sulfur rained from heaven and destroyed them all. So it will be on the day when the Son of Man is revealed. Luke 17:28-30. Are we making choices aligned with God's will, or are we allowing the world to shape us? May Lot's story inspire us to seek obedience and true faith in our walk with God. Leave us a comment about this story. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and continue watching our videos. May God bless you.